The anomaly appeared at the edge of mapped space, an empty region where no star systems should exist, where nothing had ever been recorded. And yet, something was there. The Vanguard detected it first, a ripple in gravitational forces so precise it almost seemed artificial. The ship's long-range scanners registered stars blinking out one by one, not from collapse, but as if they had never been there at all. Each disappearance followed a pattern, a sequence too deliberate to be natural. Commander Elias Vasrin leaned over the main display, frowning at the data. "This isn't right." His voice was low, measured. "These stars, if they're collapsing, there should be remnants, energy signatures, debris, but there's nothing. Erased," whispered Lieutenant Ilya Serrano, the ship's astrophysicist, staring at the screen, like they were never part of the universe to begin with. Silence stretched in the command deck. The Vanguard was a deep space research vessel designed for extreme-range exploration, but this was beyond anything they had trained for. The anomaly was not just some rogue celestial event. It was something deliberate. Then, the signal came. At first, it was nothing more than static, a tremor in the ship's communications array. But as the engineers filtered it through translation algorithms, it became something else. Not a message, but a voice. Fractured, layered over itself, speaking in different tones at once. "They will come again." The voice splintered, repeating itself out of order, as though time had broken around it. "There is no way out." Elias stiffened. "Source." Ilya turned to him, face pale. "It's coming from the anomaly." On screen, the darkness ahead pulsed like a living thing. Then, a structure emerged from the void. It was impossible to comprehend at first, its dimensions shifting between recognizable geometry and something that defied logic. The monolith was vast, larger than planets, its surface a constantly shifting labyrinth of black stone and fluid-like metal. It existed in fragments, flickering between realities, as if it were not bound to any single universe. The crew watched in stunned silence. "This," Ilya's voice trembled, "this isn't a structure." Elias turned to her. "Then what is it?" Her lips parted, but no answer came. Instead, the ship's AI responded, its synthetic voice unusually hesitant. "Anomaly detected. Classification unknown. Warning, spatial integrity compromised." The Vanguard shuddered, as if something had reached out and touched it. Inside the monolith, something moved. Something watched them back. Elias exhaled slowly. "Prepare for descent." No one argued. No one questioned him, because in that moment, they all knew the truth. There was no turning back. The Vanguard descended toward the monolith, its hull shuddering, as if space itself resisted their approach. The closer they came, the more reality seemed to warp around them. Lights flickered despite no power fluctuations. Metal groaned as if under unseen pressure, and the stars outside the viewport twisted, forming impossible patterns. Elias stood at the observation deck, gripping the railing. "Status!" Lieutenant Serrano's hands moved swiftly across the control panel. "All systems are functional, but navigation is unstable. The monolith isn't just affecting gravity, it's distorting everything. Time, space, maybe even thought." The AI's voice crackled over the speakers. "Warning! Spatiotemporal variance increasing. Hull integrity at risk." The ship trembled again, and for a moment, every screen aboard displayed the same distorted image. Faces, overlapping and shifting like reflections in shattered glass. Some belonged to the crew, others were strangers, and some had no features at all. Then the screens went dark. "Jesus," muttered Lieutenant Owen Redding, the comms officer. "I don't like this." Elias exhaled. "We've come this far. We find out what's inside, record everything, and then we leave." Nobody argued. They suited up, their EVA suits reinforced for high-gravity anomalies. The monolith had no discernible entrance, but as they neared its shifting surface, a section peeled open like the parting of ancient stone. A doorway had formed for them, as if it was expecting them. Inside, the monolith stepping through the threshold was like falling through water. For a split second, every nerve in Elias's body screamed as his mind tried to process multiple locations at once. Then, with a sudden snap, he was inside. The corridor stretched endlessly, its walls shifting between solid and translucent. Light did not behave as it should. Shadows flickered without sources. Reflections moved independently. Ilya staggered forward, clutching her helmet. I think it's changing the way we perceive reality." Owen turned in a slow circle, breathing heavily. "We shouldn't be here." As they moved deeper, the walls began to display images, flashes of places that had never existed. Cities suspended in endless storms, towers of bone rising from black oceans, and then faces, familiar faces. Elias stopped cold as he stared at one of the shifting images. It was him, or something wearing his face, but its eyes were wrong, empty, depthless, as if they had never held life to begin with. He turned away. "Commander," Owen's voice was a whisper now. "Look at the floor." Elias glanced down, his breath caught. The ground was littered with helmets. EVA suits identical to their own, some torn, some still occupied by skeletal remains. The logos on them matched the Vanguard. These were them, or versions of them. "We're not the first," Ilya said, barely above a whisper. The monolith hummed. The images flickered, and then the voice returned, closer now, no longer fractured. "There is no way out." The doorway behind them was gone. The doorway was gone. Not sealed, not hidden, just gone, as if it had never existed. The crew of the Vanguard stood frozen, staring at the shifting walls, their own distorted reflections watching them with unreadable expressions. Owen was the first to break. "We need to move. Now." Elias forced himself to breathe. Panic wouldn't help. He glanced at Ilya. She was already scanning the area, her face tight with barely contained fear. "Anything on the sensors?" She shook her head. "Nothing useful. The readings don't make sense. It's like we're not in a fixed location anymore." Owen turned, gripping his helmet as if to ground himself. "You're saying we're not inside the monolith?" "I'm saying I don't know where we are," Ilya snapped. "This thing doesn't exist in normal space. It's between." Elias clenched his jaw. The monolith was toying with them, pulling them into its own fractured existence. He activated his suit's emergency beacon, broadcasting a distress signal back to the Vanguard. The moment he did, the ship responded. "Commander Vazrin, come in. This is the Vanguard." Elias's heart surged. "Vanguard, we are trapped inside the structure. Our exit is gone. Do you have a lock on our location?" Silence. Then static. Then his own voice. "Vazrin, come in. This is the Vanguard." Elias went rigid. The same words, the same tone, his own transmission looping back at him. "What the hell?" Owen whispered. Ilya's eyes widened as she adjusted her scanner. "Elias, that's not a recording. It's from the ship, but not—" A sharp noise cut through the air. A scraping, a dragging sound. The walls moved. No, something moved within them. Elias turned just as the floor beneath them rippled like liquid. The walls pulsed, and suddenly the images displayed something new. The crew of the Vanguard. But they were dead. Their bodies were twisted, faces locked in frozen terror. Some were stretched unnaturally, their limbs merging into the monolith itself. Others were only partially there, half erased, flickering in and out of existence. Owen stumbled backward. No, that's not real. Ilya took a step forward, breath hitching. This is a warning. Elias's pulse pounded. Or it's showing us what's about to happen. Then the whispers began. Not the fractured voice from before. These whispers were closer, urgent, frantic. They came from nowhere and everywhere, overlapping like echoes of screams lost to time. You have already failed. You were always going to fail. It does not matter. Nothing ever mattered. The monolith trembled. The ground beneath them split apart, revealing an endless void below. And in that void, they saw themselves, falling, repeating, again and again, endless versions of them, tumbling through infinite darkness, some screaming, some silent, some already lifeless. Ilya gasped, clutching Elias's arm. This isn't just an anomaly, it's a loop, a recursion. Elias barely heard her. His gaze was locked on a single figure standing amidst the chaos, a version of himself, his body impossibly stretched and fragmented, his face hollow, his voice overlapping like the monolith's transmission. His doppelganger lifted its hand and whispered, "You were always here." The floor collapsed. Darkness swallowed them whole. There was no sensation of falling, only the abrupt absence of everything. No light, no sound, no weight. The Vanguard crew no longer existed in any measurable sense, yet they remained aware. Elias tried to speak, but there was no voice. Owen was gone. Ilya was gone. Or maybe they had never been. Then, reality twisted again. Elias found himself standing. The darkness peeled away like old film burning in reverse, and suddenly he was inside the Vanguard. The ship was intact, the sterile white glow of the command deck humming around him. The anomaly was gone. The monolith, never discovered. The ship's AI greeted him in its usual calm voice. "Commander Vazran, final system check complete. We are prepared to begin return transit." For a moment, Elias almost believed it. Almost. But then he noticed the details. The walls were too clean. The air, too still. The subtle, ever-present vibration of the ship's engines was missing, and the stars outside the viewport were frozen in place. A hollow feeling settled in his gut. "Where am I?" he whispered. The AI did not answer. Instead, the ship's console activated, displaying something that should not be possible. A live feed of the Vanguard's command deck. And he was in it. Except, it wasn't him. Not entirely. The figure sitting in his chair was blurred around the edges, shifting between versions of himself. Sometimes older, sometimes younger, sometimes with features he didn't recognize. Then, the figure turned. Its face was his, but empty. The mouth moved, but the voice did not come from it. It came from everywhere. "You were always here." Elias staggered backward, heart hammering. No, I was on the monolith. The crew. The figure didn't react. It simply watched him. Then the walls of the ship dissolved. The illusion shattered, revealing the monolith again. But now, it was collapsing. Fragments of reality broke apart like glass, falling into the infinite void beneath. Elias was alone. He turned wildly, searching for any trace of Ilya or Owen, but there was nothing. There had never been anything. The monolith had erased them, consumed them, unmade them so thoroughly that the universe no longer remembered they had ever existed. And now, it was his turn. The last remaining pieces of existence unraveled. The walls melted into nothing. The ground faded beneath his feet. The stars themselves flickered and died. Elias felt something pulling at him, not his body, because he no longer had one, but his awareness, his thoughts, his self. There was nothing left. And yet, in the final instant, just before the monolith devoured the last fragment of existence, a voice remained. A whisper in the dark. It doesn't matter. And then, silence. End of everything.